My wife used to call me her anchor. Said I was the one thing in her life that never moved, never drifted, never disappeared when things got hard. I believed her. For 11 years, I believed every word she said. Her name was Diane. Mine is Marcus. I was 42 when the life I thought I was building turned out to be something else entirely. A stage set, painted to look like a home, hollow if you knocked on the walls. I'm a high school history teacher, 31 kids per class. Fifth period is always the loudest. And I coach the junior varsity baseball team on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Not a glamorous life. Not a wealthy one. But a real one? Or so I thought. Diane worked as an office manager for a dental practice about 12 minutes from our house. We had a good routine. Dinner at 6:30, weekend farmers market, yard projects on Saturdays. It wasn't exciting. It was ours. She had a son from her first marriage. His name is Connor. He was 9 when I met him, 14 when all of this happened. Skinny kid, too serious for his age. Loved building model aircraft and hated being called buddy by people he didn't know well. It took him about 2 years to warm up to me. The first time he asked me to help him with the history project. I stayed up until midnight finding him primary sources. After that, things shifted. He started sitting next to me at the table without being asked. Started leaving his half-finished models on my workbench instead of his room. I never pushed it. I just stayed consistent. Eventually, consistent was enough. Diane's first husband, a man named Troy, had moved to Phoenix when Connor was 7. He called on birthdays most years. Connor had learned not to expect much from him, which is the kind of thing that breaks your heart slowly, in pieces, over time. The first thing I noticed was that she started going to the gym. That sounds like nothing. People go to the gym. But Diane had never been a gym person. She'd told me that herself, laughing, the first month we dated. Said the last time she ran voluntarily was when a yellow jacket chased her across a parking lot. So when she started going 3 evenings a week in September, I noticed. I didn't say anything. I told myself, people change. People decide to take care of themselves. I was glad for her. Then I noticed she started dressing differently on workdays. Not dramatically, just more. A little more effort. A little more effort. A little more time in the bathroom in the mornings. Her perfume, which I bought her 2 Christmases in a row because she loved it, went unworn. A new bottle appeared on her dresser. I didn't recognize the scent. I told myself I was overthinking. Then, in October, she started working late. First, it was one Tuesday. Then, in October, she started working late. First, it was one Tuesday. Then 2 Thursdays. Then it became 3, sometimes 4 evenings a week. The dental office, she said, had taken on new patients and the billing was behind. She was helping the doctor get caught up. I asked once if she was getting overtime. She said it didn't work that way there. I nodded and put her dinner in the refrigerator and went back to grading papers. Connor noticed before I did. Or maybe he noticed the same things and understood them sooner. He was 14, not 9. Old enough to read the room. One evening in November, he came into the kitchen while I was cleaning up after a dinner that his mother hadn't come home for. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then walked to the counter and picked up a dish towel without saying anything. We did the dishes together. When we finished, he looked at me with an expression I didn't have a word for at the time. It was something between worry and apology. He went upstairs. I stood in the kitchen a while longer. I found out the way most people find out. A phone left on the counter, a name I didn't recognize appearing twice in the same hour. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't looking for anything. The screen lit up while I was standing right next to it, and I read the name before I had a chance not to. Derek. I didn't look at the messages. I put the phone face down and went outside and sat on the porch steps and looked at the yard I'd spent 6 weekends resodding that spring. The grass had come in well. I'd been proud of that. I sat there for a long time. I didn't confront her that night. I'd spent 20 years teaching teenagers. And one thing that experience teaches you is that you don't walk into a hard conversation without knowing what you need to know first. You don't ask a question unless you're prepared for the answer. So I waited. I watched. I paid attention in a way I hadn't let myself pay attention before. 2 weeks later, I knew enough. His name was Derek Carver. He sold commercial real estate. He'd apparently been a client of the dental practice. Came in for a cleaning in July, started texting Diane in August, and by September, the gym visits had started. I didn't hire anyone. I didn't need to. What I found myself. in the ordinary quiet of a marriage where one person had stopped being careful. I found a receipt in the pocket of her coat when I brought it in from the car. Dinner for two at a restaurant 40 minutes away. A Thursday. The night she'd told me a root canal had run long and she'd grabbed fast food on the way home. I held the receipt for a long time. Then I put it back in the pocket. I needed to think. That Saturday, Connor and I drove to a hobby shop 30 minutes away to find a specific piece he needed for a P-51 Mustang he'd been working on for 3 months. On the way back, he was quiet for longer than usual. The radio was on low. He had the bag with the model piece in his lap, and he kept turning it over in his hands. He said, "Marcus, can I ask you something?" I said, "Of course." He didn't say anything for a minute. Then he said, "Are you and my mom okay?" I kept my eyes on the road. I asked him what made him ask that. "Are you and my mom okay?" I kept my eyes on the road. I asked him what made him ask that. He said he didn't know. Said things felt weird lately. Said his mom seemed like she was somewhere else even when she was home. I told him every marriage has stretches that are harder than others. That it didn't mean anything was broken. He nodded. But he didn't look convinced, and 14-year-olds are harder to fool than people give them credit for. That night, after Connor was in bed, I asked Diane if we could talk. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd had 100 ordinary dinners, and I watched her settle into her chair with the comfortable ease of someone who doesn't know what's coming. And I felt, in that moment, something I still don't entirely have a name for. It wasn't rage. It was closer to grief with its coat already on. I told her I'd found the receipt. The way her face changed. I've thought about it many times since. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was more like the particular exhaustion of someone who's been carrying a heavy thing and has just been told they no longer have to pretend it isn't heavy. She said his name before I asked. Derek. She said his name before I asked. Derek. She said they'd been seeing each other since August. She said she hadn't meant for it to happen. She said he was different. That he made her feel like... And then she stopped. Because I think she understood, looking at my face, that there was no version of that sentence that ended well. I asked her one question. I asked if she wanted to stay. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I had my answer before she spoke. She said she thought she might be in love with him. She said she was sorry. She said she knew how that sounded. I told her I needed her to leave that night. She didn't argue. She went upstairs, packed a bag, and left. I heard her car pull out of the driveway around midnight. I sat in the kitchen until the light outside changed color. Then I went upstairs and looked in on Connor. He was asleep with one arm hanging off the bed, the same way he'd slept since he was small. I pulled his door almost shut and went to my own room and lay on top of the covers until morning. The next few weeks were the mechanical kind of hard. Lawyers, paperwork, phone calls that felt like they were happening to someone else. Diane stayed with a friend at first. Then, about 3 weeks after she left, she told me she'd moved in with Derek. I didn't react. I'd already done my reacting in private. What I hadn't anticipated was Connor. He found out from his mother directly. She sat him down and told him she'd moved out because she and I were separating and that she was in a relationship with someone new. Connor came home from that conversation. He'd spent the weekend with her and walked straight past me into the kitchen. I heard him open the refrigerator and close it without taking anything. Then he came and stood in the doorway of the living room where I was sitting. He said, "She told me." I said, "I know." He asked if she was really with someone else. I said, "I know." He asked if she was really with someone else. I said, "Yes." He stood there for a moment. Then he said, "That's messed up." I told him his mother still loved him, that none of this had anything to do with him. He gave me a look that was too tired for 14 and said he knew and went upstairs. That night I heard him in his room, not talking, not gaming, just the faint sound of something being assembled, piece by piece, the way he always worked when he needed to think. Derek, it turned out, was not quite what he presented himself as. I found this out not through any digging of my own, but because Connor came home from his first visit to their new apartment and told me, quietly, that Derek had shown his mother a portfolio on his laptop, real estate developments, investment properties, projected returns. Connor had seen it over her shoulder. The numbers were large. The lifestyle being described was very large. Connor, to his credit, had written down one of the company names he'd seen on the screen. He slid the piece of paper across the counter to me. I looked it up that evening. The company existed. It had a professional website. It also had 3 pending civil suits attached to its registered address, which I found through public court records in about 25 minutes. One from a couple who'd invested $40,000 in a development project that had stalled. One from a former business partner, one from a property management group that alleged fraud. I printed the pages and put them in a folder and set the folder on the kitchen counter. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't satisfaction. It was something sadder than that. It was the recognition that Diane had traded what we had for a story someone had told her, and that the story had numbers in it, and that the numbers were not real. I didn't call her. I didn't send her the documents. I put the folder in a drawer and went to help Connor with his model, and let the information sit where it was. She called me about 6 weeks later. It was a Tuesday evening in January. Cold outside. Connor was at baseball practice. I'd kept coaching even through all of it, because the kids needed consistency and so did I. She asked if we could meet. Her voice was different from the last time we'd spoken. It had lost something. We met at a coffee shop. She was there when I arrived, both hands around a cup she hadn't drunk from. I sat across from her. She said things weren't what she'd thought they were. I told her I'd figured that might happen. She looked at me. She asked if I'd known something. I told her I'd found some public records, yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said Derek had asked her to transfer $22,000 from their joint savings, money she'd taken in the separation, into an investment account he controlled. She'd done it. He was now not returning her calls consistently. I sat with that information. I didn't say I told you so. Not because I'm a saint, but because it wasn't going to do either of us any good, and because I could see from her face that she was already living inside the consequence of her own choices. I asked her what she wanted from this conversation. She said she didn't know. She said she missed Connor. She said she thought she'd made a terrible mistake. I told her that I believed the first 2 things. About the third thing, I didn't say anything because it was no longer mine to respond to. I told her that whatever happened between her and Derek, Connor needed his mother consistently and reliably in his life, and that I would not be in the way of that. I told her I expected her to show up for him and not disappear when things got difficult the way his father had. She flinched at that. I hadn't meant it as cruelty. I'd meant it as honesty. She nodded. She looked at the table. She asked about me. She asked about what I see. I thought about how to answer that. I told her I was getting there. I told her the house was quieter than I was used to, but that Connor and I had fallen into a good rhythm. She smiled at that, a small, sad smile. She said Connor loved me. She said she'd always known that. I drove home and picked Connor up from baseball practice, and we stopped for burgers on the way back. He ate with the particular appetite of a teenager who just runs sprints for 90 minutes. He told me about practice. He told me one of the pitchers had developed a new grip and was throwing better. He talked with his hands. He'd always talked with his hands. When we pulled into the driveway, he said, "Hey, Marcus." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Thanks for not going anywhere." I sat in the parked car for a second. Then I said, "Not a chance." He grabbed his bag and went inside. I sat in the driveway another minute before I followed him. That was 14 months ago. The divorce finalized in the spring. Diane has her own apartment now. Derek, from what I understand, has a civil judgment against him from 2 of those 3 cases. He's not in the picture anymore, or not the way he was. Diane has Connor every other weekend and every Wednesday evening. She shows up. I'll give her that. Whatever she went through with Derek seemed to recalibrate something in her, and she shows up for Connor now in a way that I think surprised even her. Connor turned 15 in March. He's getting taller faster than either of us expected. He made varsity baseball as a freshman, which almost never happens. And he pitched 2 innings in a real game, and walked 1 batter and struck out 2, and came off the mound looking like he'd just done something he was going to remember for a long time. I was in the 3rd row of the bleachers. I don't think he knew I was there until the last inning. When he spotted me, he gave me this very small nod, the kind that means more than it looks like. I still teach 5th period. Still coach. I resodded a section of the yard that didn't come in well last fall, and I think it's going to take this time. People ask me sometimes, friends, my sister, a couple of colleagues who know what happened, how I'm doing, and what they're really asking is whether I'm bitter, whether I'm angry, whether I've moved on. I tell them the truth, which is that I'm fine. Not performing fine. Actually fine. I don't know exactly when the anger burned down to something manageable. Somewhere between the coffee shop conversation and Connor's first varsity start, I think. Somewhere in the ordinary accumulation of Tuesday dinners and Thursday practices and weekends where nothing dramatic happened and everything that mattered still did. I loved Diane. That part was real. What she needed from life turned out to be something I couldn't give her, or something she believed she couldn't find with me, and she made choices that hurt people, including herself. I don't think she's a bad person. I think she was restless in a way she didn't know how to name, and someone came along with a story that sounded like an answer. The story turned out to be a lie. That's not a punishment I arranged. That's just the arithmetic of certain kinds of choices. What I know is this. I still have the kitchen table. I still have the yard. I still have a 14-tayed, now 15-year-old who leaves his model aircraft on my workbench and asks me for help with primary sources and texts me after road games to tell me the final score. A few weeks ago, Connor was working on a new model. A Spitfire this time. British, World War II. He'd been at it for 3 evenings in a row. I came into the workroom and he was leaning over the table with tweezers, fitting a piece that was barely visible to the naked eye. He didn't look up. He just said, "I've been thinking I might want to study aerospace engineering." I said that sounded about right. He said his counselor told him he should start looking at colleges. I said we could start looking together whenever he was ready. He put the piece in place, held it for a moment, let go. It stayed. He looked up then and said, "Yeah, okay, let's do that." The Spitfire on his workbench had both wings now. It was starting to look like what it was supposed to be. I stood in the doorway a while and watched him work, and the house was quiet in a way that no longer felt like absence. It just felt like home.